I'm Corinne Riley. I'm a partner here at Greylock, where I focus on early-stage B2B AI applications and infrastructure. So I'm very excited for tonight's panel. We're joined by 3 CEOs who, each of which are building in very different industries, but each of which are really at the frontier of adopting agents into their products. So we're joined by Jesse at Decagon, by Varun at Windsurf, and lastly by Spiros at Resolve. So to set the stage and get started, who are you? Quick intro on your company, and maybe talk about why the problem that your company is building requires AI agents in the first place.
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Jesse. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO here at Decagon. What we do is we're building AI customer service agents. And so you can, I guess the use case is like pretty easy to wrap your head around, which is, next time, let's say your flight gets delayed and you need to call in and you want to change your seat or change your booking, AI agent can handle it for you. And so generally we sit, at the edge in terms of actually interacting with customers. So we're having tons of conversations all the time. It can be over chat or email or voice calls. And the goal is to add a lot of efficiency and sort of automation for our customers, but also just give the end customer a better experience. Why does this require agents? In general, this is like a very obvious use case for agents because it is a conversation at the end of the day. And so you're having a conversation with someone. You need to be able to handle pretty complex situations. You have to look up data. You have to take actions. You have to work through workflows sometimes, and that's where the agent comes together. And so that's what we do.
Hey, I'm Varun, and co-founder of Windsurf. We actually use Decagon, so it's awesome to see Jesse over here. So we build sort of software that hopefully can reduce the time it takes to build technology and applications by 99%. That's like the goal of the company. We recently launched 4 or 5 months ago this editor. Before that, we were known as Codium, and before that, Exafunction. So we've gone through a couple name changes, hopefully each time a little bit easier. I think the reason why, in the software space, this is almost obvious why agents are quite important. I think what I would have told this crowd like a year ago is our product reduces the time it takes to build apps by 40% or 20%, and it writes 40 to 50% of all committed code. And now within our company, I would say Windsurf is reducing the time it takes for us to build apps by over 40%, and it's writing over 80 or 90% of all software inside our company. So I think we're seeing this rapid sort of exponential growth in the power of agents in software building, and super excited to discuss it today.
Spiros, I am founder of Resolve. This has been our first and only name. I worked in dev tools and observability all my career. Previously started 2 companies in the space, co-created OpenTelemetry. In my last role, I was running the observability team at Splunk, which was a very large production system with high availability requirements. And at scale, the majority of our engineering time was actually spent in making sure the system runs reliably, right? Ram here and I worked together. He was running our platform team. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. There was a point in time where 90% of our SRE team even resigned, right? Because of the load and what it took to keep it reliable. In some sense, in my view, software engineering, obviously coding is a big part of what software engineers do, but there is many other aspects to work, right? And those tend actually to also be very stressful, tend to be actually very tedious sometimes. There is a lot of toil. So what Resolve is trying to do is trying to automate essentially software engineering tasks that are beyond coding, right? And why do you need agents for that? You need agents because a Copilot is not going to hold your pager. So a lot of what Resolve does is it essentially tries to deeply understand the software system all the way from source code to, let's say, backend databases and everything in between, and perform tasks, right? The most common task we do today where we focus is actually something goes wrong, maybe an alert or a page fires. Our agent has to essentially follow a multi-step, open-ended investigation flow to get to an answer and hopefully help you remediate the problem before it becomes an issue, right? And that cannot be done, or a human maybe can be assisted by Copilot, but then the acceleration you have is limited. And more importantly, a human has to always be involved. Our goal is to actually not even interrupt humans when something goes wrong.
So that's actually a perfect segue into the first question, which is for Varun and Spiros. And both of you are building for an end user who's a software engineer. And we think about software engineering and AI, Copilots are probably the most prevalent and most popularized use case of generative AI in enterprises. And so how do you think about the fact that both of you are embracing agents in your products. And if you think about your engineer, they're used to working with Copilots. Like, what do you envision the evolution being in product from Copilot to agents?
Yeah, so I can start, and even what some of the things Varun introduced earlier is true, right? Like essentially, copilots maybe can help us go better, and maybe can help us do that at an individual level, right? But it's difficult to accelerate an entire team, right? And our goal here is not only essentially to be able to help humans go faster. Our goal here is to help like the entire team, or let's say the technology output grow 10x, right? Solve much harder problems that were not possible before, and especially in our case, like help humans avoid like extremely stressful things, or wake up in the middle of the night, or be interrupted when they're doing something. So it's obviously there are tasks for which still a human has to be involved, but it's much better if like essentially the agent does all the work and maybe asks a human when a critical decision has to be made or an irreversible decision has to be made. But our view is that agents obviously are a lot more powerful, and they create much more acceleration than what maybe a human-driven flow via Copilot can do.
Yeah, I think like we started obviously the company we called Codium. We just had extensions at the time. I think it was very much a head-to-head competitor with GitHub Copilot. At the time, obviously, the only thing that existed was autocomplete. You had maybe like a couple months later, we had chat. And I think fundamentally, like what differentiated these products was just the level of intent you could imbue into the product, right? Like for autocomplete, it's just you write some code and hopefully it completes the next couple lines. For chat, maybe you can ask like a tangential question and you can find a way to apply it back into the code base. And I think there was a fundamental change that happened once these models started to be able to kind of call functions, call tools, that made it so that they were able to make larger and larger scale changes, right? And now like engineers at our company are not, I guess, asking, hey, how do I do something? It's more like, do it in my code base, right? And that kind of an operation of understanding the code base and making larger and larger changes is where kind of the future is going. And I think, if I was to make one more sort of claim here, it's that what we're actually finding is actually we're now forcing the agent to solve different kinds of problems, right? If you were to think about in the past, Copilot and these kinds of tools would help you in very quickly writing boilerplate code. It's actually helping in the review pipeline. It's helping deploy software. It's helping design software and all these different aspects of the software development lifecycle. So it's just like, finding different pieces that can be optimized. And I think like, we're just at the very early innings of this right now.
Jesse, and also Spiros, I think this will be relevant to you, so feel free to chime in too. We're seeing a lot of popularization of frameworks, of no-code voice apps, of the ability for people really to build agents themselves if they wanted to. If you're an enterprise sitting here, how would you answer the question of when should I think about building my own agentic application internally versus buying?
The build versus buy thing, I think it mostly just depends on what's core to your business. So if you're building a product that you want to be like a competitive differentiation and like a feature of your products, or it's just like core to your business to own it, then it makes sense to build. I think for our space, by and large, people, it doesn't make sense to build because they might experiment with it a little bit, but they realize like, oh, you have to build all these kind of protections around it. You have to like build alerting and monitoring. You have to make it so that it's customizable by the non-technical CX team. And once it gets to that point, it's like, why are we spending our valuable engineering resources on this when like, customer service obviously is very important, but it's not like a core part of our product. So I think that the build versus buy thing ends up not being that big of a, I think, talking point in our space. I think for us, it really is the more interesting way to look at it is that everyone's agent is actually quite different. Mm-hmm. So if we're deploying a customer service agent to like a large airline compared to like a car rental company compared to like a bank or something, like everyone's going to want like a different agent. And so it has to be really customizable. And then it's our responsibility to give them the tools to customize it themselves if they want to. And like in that sense, they are kind of building it, but they're not building it from scratch using like LLMs. And so that's how we think about it.
Anything to add?
Yeah, sure. First of all, everybody should be building, in my opinion, right? It's an exciting time and it's worth experimenting, obviously, no matter what the business. The other reality, though, is that building a demo, in kind of the agentic world or world of models is the easiest thing, but building a production-grade app is probably the hardest thing. In my last company, we built a distributed tracing platform. We claim and we believe was the most scalable distributed tracing platform in the world, and we built it with like 10 engineers. Resolve is like a 40+ people team with like diverse expertise in AI, in like systems, in UX, and it's a much, much, much harder problem. So I would say like I agree that unless it's an existential threat to your business, it probably doesn't make much sense to be prioritizing this, right? Because even the level of talent it takes, it's very, very hard to come by, and you better deploy that for what your business does, right? Like essentially that pretty much makes it clear, in my opinion, where this should be spending the resources on this front.
Maybe one thing that I kind of have to add is I actually believe, agree with both of these gentlemen, but for the most part, actually, we're seeing something that's a little bit different, actually. So, before we launched Windsurf, we gave the product out to everyone at our company, including people that were not technical, right, at our company. And they built apps for the very first time. And actually, interestingly, some of our biggest power users now at the company are people that don't write software inside our company. And largely speaking, what they've been doing is they've been building apps. Like we have a VP of partnerships that is our biggest power user at the company that has now replaced like buying sales tools with building them himself. And these are not very complex workflow-based sales tools. These are tools that are quoting tools, right? Very, very point-specific tools that don't have a lot of depth attached to them, right? No, he is. He's the guy that needs to generate the quote, right? So I think basically like these domain experts are able to kind of build these tools. Now they're not like really deep. It's not like customer success, right? But it's almost democratized a lot of these basic pieces of software that you would have paid 6 figures for a really, really crappy piece of software. Like these companies that sell you these tools, they're terrible companies. And you don't need to buy their software anymore, which is pretty cool.
I by the way, I agree. Like what I think on that front, like what it makes sense is probably not to spend time building like very infrastructure hard problems, but in some sense, like if let's say the data is there, building maybe something on top, something that is much more specific to your application, or even an orchestration, with existing AI agents, makes a lot more sense. I agree.
Yeah, actually, that's a great intro to the next topic, which is around customization, which both of you are talking about. And so, specifically, if I think about support and if I think about you, Varun, I assume that each of your customers or even the specific use cases are extremely different. And an enterprise may have an existing type of SOP or a tree decision making that they've been using for years, or a specific stack that like their humans are just used to working around. And so, given that, how do you think about making your product and your agents customizable to your end user?
Yeah, I mean, we think about this a lot. I think this is like the #1 sort of differentiator and sort of, I guess, foundation of our company. Because if you think about customer support, there has been a pretty long history of automation, right? If you call an airline right now, it's you just step down the decision tree. You had the CRMs originally, and then people started building IVRs where it's like press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and then we had more NLP-based chatbots where it kind of understands what you're saying and might recommend an article for you. And this generation is, AI agents. I think generally, if you're using the same framework to build stuff, that's like kind of an L, I guess, because you're not really taking advantage of what LLMs are good at. And so the older generations, what you're doing is you're taking what you want the AI to do, and you're approximating it into some sort of framework. And the framework usually looks like a decision tree, or it could also be, someone writing code via an SDK or whatever. And that kind of works, but you reach like a cap really quickly. And I think that's a little bit specific to our space, because generally the people that are in charge of what like a customer service person does, they're not technical, right? They don't really know how to think through things that way. And that's really not what their job is. And so typically what has to happen in the past is like I'm the CX leader and I had the telephone through someone technical, and they go and like edit the decision tree for me. And the iteration cycle is just being super slow. You're really kind of just blocked on that, and then you reach a quality ceiling really quickly because you're not able to cover all of the cases. And that's why if you call like an airline today and a lot of sort of situations, you're just stuck. And so we basically came at a different angle. The reason why we started the company is that we basically believe that in all of these different custom agents, there's some sort of way to build them and teach them how to do things in the same way that you would teach a human. And the way that humans learn is you have SOPs, right? So if you go to a big company, they have tons of SOPs of describing how to do things, and they're natural language based. And so we created what we now call AOPs, Agent Operating Procedures. And they're essentially a way for non-technical people to really quickly spin up this logic and like do it very rigorously. And you can still give engineers the control of the underlying code to control when it hits my system and how it processes that data and like how you take actions and stuff like that. So I think in the future, a lot of agentic systems, like us, like other sort of applications will have frameworks like this, or they're not really a framework. We'll have like systems like this where you're able to customize the agent really quickly using natural language, and that's what we do.
So yeah, so I think for us, like we obviously have this like individual product that's fairly large, but we do work with some fairly large enterprises. So customers like JPMC have tens of thousands of developers currently on our product right now. Companies like Dell. And obviously, this is a problem we need to think about a lot, right? Like these companies have singular code bases that are over 100 million lines of code, right? One of these companies actually has over 50,000 repositories. I have no idea why they have that many repositories, but they do. I guess for us, like we built systems in place to make it so that they can build guidelines on a team-by-team basis. But actually, I'm not convinced that that's like the long-term right solution, right? Like having people document the exact way that they need to write software, it's like writing a README, right? You write the README and then like 2 months later, it's just completely wrong and no one wants to really fix it. So I think like there's this opportunity to build like this Google-like experience, which is to say it understands the intent of your team. And I don't think anyone has really solved this. And I think this is like an open problem for us. It's like if we watched every developer at a company, can we make it so that it is materially easier to onboard a new developer inside the company? Is there some sort of a network effect here? I think like that remains to be proven. But there are obviously some interesting ideas we've built to make the system more personalizable for internally. Obviously we don't even know if this is the future protocol, but MCP is something that a lot of companies talk about. Can they connect to their own internal data systems? And we built hooks to make it actually accessible. But I think not super clear what the exact solution is here. I don't think we have the answer.
And how far do you think we are from that?
I think tools like MCP are really, really interesting. There's like, if you go to like an actual large company, there are like a lot of obvious holes. Like security is like a really, really big hole. You don't want to give, a random developer at the company write access to like the most critical database, even though that might be something another system might want access to, right? So I think we're close to there. Like if you use our product, if you use Windsurf, and you actually like write a little bit of software in the editor, and then you just write continue, we actually have built systems to deeply understand the intent of the user to then go continue from where you're from, and it performs relatively well. So maybe it's like one model generation away, and we're kind of just waiting for that.
Yeah, I think it'll happen use case by use case, because not all use cases are built the same, and so. And it's not even just like how complex the use case is. I think there's like different use cases that are just structured well for this type of customization.
Yeah. And so that's the future. But maybe today, what's good enough for customers, and how do they think about ROI around that? And actually, let's quickly go across all three of you, right? Just because this is probably very different for each domain. But if you think about the elements that customers are evaluating you on, what's a need to have, what's a nice to have, and how are they measuring these things? Maybe Spiros, do you want to start?
So the question is, how do customers evaluate a product like ours? Because it does something that was not possible before, basically, right? Actually, it is hard, right? And what I see sometimes is also people compare it to the ideal, right? That no human can even do. In my mind, like a lot of the things, an agentic system like ours that understands like software end-to-end does are pretty magical, because compared to what was possible before. But also, we're still in this like transitionary phase where we're not just selling an agentic AI software, we're selling maybe a way or changing the workflow that people operate and how humans operate, right? And we'll take this transition in some sense to be able to capture, let's say, the value that these systems provide, right? So we're still at the very, very beginning of that. Maybe the technology is ahead of where we are in some sense, in terms of how we work, right, to be able to fully capture these things. But obviously, on the other hand, there is huge amount of interest and desire, because in our case in particular, like a lot of the problems we solve are very stressful, painful, nobody wants to wake up in the middle of the night, right? So there is the very, very clear value, and more so, I would say, from individuals than maybe the buyers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think when our product was largely speaking autocomplete and chat, there were like some very obvious metrics. There are some metrics we killed very quickly, like acceptance rate. Like that was not a very good metric just because it's gameable. Like you could imagine if a product just shows no suggestions but like an end of line curly brace, like that would be 100% acceptance rate, but the amount of value you're generating is very low. But instead what we decided to do is show a metric called percentage of code written, which is of the committed software, what fraction of it is AI generated, and just seeing that tick up over time. Like every time we introduce a new capability, like more personalization, better models, what the impact is, and there's like a loose correlation between that and productivity. Right? So this is actually very hard for us to measure raw productivity. It requires like a long A/B test where maybe you take the same set of developers 3 months before and 3 months after and see what the productivity is. But I think what's actually like interesting is companies are not doing this kind of large-scale tests nearly as much, just because by the time they do the test, 3 months later the product is materially better, and then they need to redo a new test. So I think we try to provide whatever metrics we possibly can that are immutable, like percentage code written, but ultimately there's going to be some amount of vibes on top of that.
Our use case, I would say, has two big properties that are pretty important for agents to work in production, I think. So one property is that the ROI is pretty measurable. And so in our case, it is what percentage of tickets are you automatically handling? And then a secondary one, and sometimes this is the primary one, which is how happy are customers? And I think if both of those are good, then it's like a very easy business case of like, oh, wow, we're saving a ton of money and our customers are happier. And so I think that's a nice property because it allows people to move quicker. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, like we can justify this and so on. And the nice thing is that they're already measuring these things because if you have human agents, you have to measure these things. The other property, and I think this is also true of all of us as well, is that the AI agent doesn't have to do like everything off the bat perfectly. Mm-hmm. And so for our situation, like you might have a customer that has like 100 use cases that they need to be done or 1,000. But if the AI agent can just do like the top 25 very well, that's already a ton of value. And then structurally what you can do is you can escalate the rest of the conversations and you're still saving a ton of money and you're also providing a lot of value to the end users. So yeah, I think those two things are both important.
Yeah, that's a good segue. So all the questions so far have been about how we're building these agents and exactly what they are. And the next set is more about humans interacting with agents, right? And so actually maybe starting with Jesse and then Spiros, do you have a framework of thinking about what are the types of tasks that should be done by end-to-end by an agent versus when it makes sense to have a human in the loop? And what other parameters do customers think about when you're making that decision for them of when to bring that human back in the loop?
I think it's a spectrum. So for us, oftentimes it comes down to the sensitivity of the task or maybe regulation or just maybe the data is not available yet for the AI to access, and so it has to be done through a human. Mm-hmm. So typically, the easy tasks in customer service are called tier 1 tasks, and then you have tier 2 and tier 3. The tier 1 tasks are generally where you start because they're easier, they should also be easier for an AI agent to handle. And you can crank through those, and those might still require like a little bit of reasoning and taking action and looking up data. And then if maybe you're in a regulated space and all fraud inquiries have to go through some sort of process that like still requires a human, and then those get escalated and so on. So I think for us, it's kind of a spectrum of like complexity and sensitivity and regulation.
Yeah, so in our case, a lot of the tasks that the agents are trying to perform are very complex, highly complex. It will take sometimes hours for a human to go through all of the things, right? Imagine, for example, troubleshooting an incident that, in a distributed system, right? Maybe you have to check tens of dashboards, run like hundreds of queries to get to an outcome, right? So collecting all these symptoms, doing all this kind of lower level work is ideal almost, right? It's kind of a bit of a retrieval problem and summarization, and it's ideal for an agent or multiple agents to do. In a way, like where a human should come into play is, to kind of verify when you're uncertain, especially if the agent can determine that, right? If there are two possible answers to a problem, which is quite common in our case, or when essentially you're taking an action, right? In a way, agents in production today are more like self-driving cars almost, where we might have proof that is a lot safer than a human driver, but still this is not good enough to let it go, right? So, in our case, what we try to do is do all of the work, and maybe if there is a final step that is irreversible, then a human takes that step, right? And I think from that, maybe the next step would be to, okay, if some of these actions, let's say, mutate the system, but still are reversible, maybe an agent can take them, right? And if they're irreversible completely, then maybe a human should always approve them, right? Or for now, should approve them. So that's roughly the framework. And of course, sometimes is when a human needs to interject because they have some information that the agent doesn't have, right?
Varun, a lot of the questions tonight have revolved around, and what we've talked about in these products is, humans collaborating with agents. And obviously a topic a lot of people bring up is agent-to-agent collaboration. People call it a lot of different things, swarms of agents, but really it's just multiple agents superpowering each other, essentially, in your product. What do you believe needs to happen to make that a reality that's actually valuable? And Spiros, Jesse, feel free to chime in as well if you have any thoughts.
We've tried some of this stuff. I don't think we've had a lot of success with many agents. In fact, I think there's this weird bitter lesson kind of thing that might be happening here, which is if you just have one smart thing, can you just make the one smart thing do more things? That just feels like the simpler thing. And I guess before this, I worked in autonomous vehicles, and I guess the whole thing that we built was we built these different components, each different machine learning models. They all communicate with each other with different protocols. And then I think if you went back to the autonomous vehicle space, it's just one massive model. In fact, our company was probably making fun of the idea of Tesla being pixel to torque, and now everyone's going back to doing pixel to torque. So I think from our perspective, maybe we would not build weirdly within our product multiple agents. Maybe the reason why we'd build multiple agents is we need to communicate with another system that is an agent product. But I don't know if that was a clear answer there.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what you define an agent. Yeah, I agree with Varun. If you break down how our agents work, yeah, there are components that you could also call agents on their own, but we consider the whole thing an agent. I have personally not seen many use cases, actually any use cases in production yet that are truly agent to agent, like a swarm of agents. I think what it would look like for us is if we're deployed in a larger organization and they have a lot of internal agents, then perhaps our agent needs to call on those agents to figure things out and pull information. But I don't think the industry is quite there yet. But I do think one day it will work. Mm-hmm. Right now, we just haven't seen it.
Our product is kind of a collection of agents, but that's also not visible to the user, right? Because there is maybe an agent that understands code versus an agent that understands, let's say, telemetry versus an agent that understands infrastructure. But that's not how the user perceives the product, right? The user interacts with one agent that kind of does all the work, plans, responds back. And I think actually we don't even have the protocols or the means to do this across, let's say, maybe agents of, let's say, for Windsurf and Resolve to talk, the language even is not there, right? Okay, how do you represent ontology in a software system, right? What does a release even mean, for example, right? It means something to a human, or it means something to a human in a particular context, but it's not easy to communicate across agents, right? I think MCP is not there, right? It doesn't have all the tools we need for this level of work. And I also don't believe in the long run, agents are gonna run in the enterprise uncontrolled, right? I think there is gonna be that, of course, but you have to actually, think about security and compliance and all the other things that SaaS software has to comply to.
Okay, I have one last lightning round question, and then we're going to open it up to the crowd for one, maybe two questions from the audience. So if you have a question, start thinking about it. So the lightning round is, give a specific example in your product or in your industry today that today is a ceiling that can't be solved by an agent, but you think is on the near horizon of something that can be unlocked. And I'll let any of you start. Whoever wants to start, please chime in.
I can go first. So I think some of the use cases that we would classify as the tier 3s tend to be more open-ended exploration, where there's not an answer yet. But if you were kind of an intelligent human, you could figure the answer out. And sometimes the agents still struggle with those. So an example could be oh, you have a highly technical product, and maybe it's a hardware product, and you don't have documentation of all the cases of where something could go wrong, but you have enough documentation to maybe reason through okay, you have these lights in the back, and if the light's red, it's like this. If it's green, it's like this. If it's yellow, whatever, right? And those are typically the most common tier 3s that we see, where those typically go to an agent, and that agent typically is someone who's pretty specialized, and they've had maybe a year plus of training / experience to become the tier 3 agent. So that's why I would say in our space as well, I think it's still going to be at least a few years before there's no agents, and that's perfectly fine, human agents, I mean. And Yeah, so that's an example where there's no right answer, but you can like reason through it. And to reason through it, you might need quite a bit of time, but I think we'll get there one day.
Yeah, maybe one of the things that obviously we talk a lot about is like, what does the future of like building software look like? And it's probably for a large chunk of people, maybe like you're able to modify a spec, and actually by modifying the spec, it like writes more and more code. I think we're not there yet. I don't think but for some classes of apps that are more simple, maybe we are there. And I think right now, these systems are probably not at the point where it can reasonably do this. It doesn't understand the existing app well enough, or it doesn't understand the reason why the app was built, and it doesn't understand the domain-specific information from the company. But that feels like it's not like a lasting problem, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like similar kind of experiences, right? Like what we find is that obviously models are very good at, or the agents are very good at dealing with like, horizontal work, let's say, a lot of, go look at a lot of things, do it at once. But then when it comes to actually things that where a human actually can reason very easily about, they often fail in very, very simple tasks, right? Because like the actual reasoning is not there. You can train it, like if you have enough examples, you can do RL and maybe get it to reason really, or pretend to reason about the problem, but it's not really there yet, right? And that shows usually up when you have like a novel problem that you haven't experienced before, and you have to kind of decide from first principles, where a human does it very well, but agents don't.
Great. Okay, we're gonna open it to 1 or 2 questions. Is there anyone who has a dying question to ask? Amazing up here. Kendra's gonna, or Chris is gonna bring you the microphone.
So I have a question for Jesse. I was wondering, like, are there any industries that you see is harder to penetrate for your agents, like maybe financial services, healthcare, and do you see that being a vertical which is just going to be specialized and you can't compete with a company that's in that vertical?
Oh yeah, great question. I mean, we think about that a lot. I don't think it has anything to do with like specializing in industry. I think some industries are going to be slower because of regulation mostly, or just compliance. I don't think you gain much from being verticalized from like a compliance perspective. It's more of like a matter of time, like working through the compliance and also waiting for the industry to kind of normalize AI agents. The quicker moving ones are for sure going to be the non-regulated ones. And then I think I would probably guess that financial services moves a bit quicker than healthcare. And then healthcare, like insurance, like a lot of these like super regulated ones will be slower. And it's definitely not slower from a tech perspective. Like it's not because the tech is harder, it's just because of compliance. So I think a lot of the players in our space have to just like work through that, and like it'll get there at some point.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Well, back there, sorry. We're coming over.
This question is also for you, Jesse, but in the cloud world, like, there was this idea of a shared responsibility model where if you use AWS, they'll protect people going in and stealing your hardware, but you're responsible for setting up firewall rules. And when you think about agents, you're building a unique company where your customers also expose the agent to their customers. Can you talk a little bit about what does that shared responsibility model look like when it comes to guardrails? How do you guys think about it? And what's the technology around that?
Yeah. Guardrails are really important. I think this is a conversation that we have with every one of our customers before they actually sign with us. And that is that, hey, you are the actual touch point with our end customers, and so that's a big responsibility. How can we trust you to make sure that, one, you won't go off the rails, and two, if you are within the rails, how do we make sure you're accurate and actually following instructions and so on? So for larger engagements, like there is some sort of like proving process, and so we will run like like a sandbox for them, and like they'll be able to test it out and so on, and that helps with a lot of buy-in. We've even had customers that like they will red team us themselves, where like they either hire a firm or their security team goes in and like tries to get it to mess up in 1,000 different ways. And some of those conversations end up being pretty funny, but we've always held up against those, and so that's like one proof point where you can make sure that like, hey, generally we've done a lot of tests. We also have a testing platform built into our product where they set up their own unit tests, and like you're able to just like crank through and just get a lot of confidence that way. So that's on the confidence building side of just making sure like, hey, this is a competent team with a good product that like won't mess up. On the liability side, I mean, I think there's nothing really special about agents, I would say, compared to like normal SaaS, because like normal SaaS, you also will take on sometimes like, hey, we'll give you like a 1x cap on the, if like we are responsible for something horrible that goes wrong. And I think that's like pretty standard for agents where, you know, if something goes wrong that like actually we caused, then there's like a, you know, 1x cap on, you know, sort of damages there. So, yeah.
Great. Well, that concludes the panel. Thank you, Spiros, Varun, Jesse, for joining us, and thank you everyone for attending. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is just the first of our Change Agents series. We actually have more scheduled for next week and many subsequent weeks, and so would love to see you again. You know, the teams are going to have their booths at the end of the room, and we also have Greylock's AI infrastructure companies at the end of the room as well. So please stay for drinks and to mingle and to check out the demos of all the companies here. And thanks for joining.
Thank you.